Today's video, I think we're talking about the problems that sellers may face with their accounting and bookkeeping in the UK specifically,
Mhm.
and the pitfalls to avoid. So, do you want me just to kick off with the big ones?
Yeah, let's kick off with the big ones. And also would appreciate
Yeah.
if you explain where Link My Books can come in and help in a sense, like where what does it
Yeah.
solve? But yeah, from the UK seller perspective, yeah, it would be interesting.
Nice. So I think one of the things we see the most often with UK-based sellers is that they're effectively getting their bookkeeping wrong. So they come to us and they'll say like, "Oh, I've been doing this manually now," or "I pass it to my accountant and they just deal with it." And I think I'm just looking for something to speed this up a little bit. And they think
Mhm.
that the only reason they need software is to save a bit of time instead of them having to go in and download the reports and stuff like that. I can see a fly flying around you.
Yeah, I'm
So
trying to maneuver
it's
to
annoying you.
listen to you and to also, yeah, it's like, but
Um,
yeah,
little
yeah,
dance in the background there.
yeah.
And so what they don't realize is that under the surface, they're actually getting their bookkeeping wrong. So we actually did a survey a good few many years ago now,
Mm.
but there was 100 users that came into the platform, and we looked at them, and 75 of those 100 were getting their bookkeeping wrong. And it was things like they were under or over declaring VAT, or they weren't reclaiming VAT on some of their fees, or they were getting things just catastrophically wrong by just taking the amount that had been paid from the sales channel and just putting that straight in as revenue and accounting for that as just sales and just counting it done for the day. But if we break
Mm.
those down a little bit further as to why they're wrong, so if we look at the VAT one, for example, so on the VAT side of things, on your income, so the money that you've received in from customers, there's basically a few ways you can get that wrong. The first is you're not separating the income out by tax rate. So if, for example, you sell standard rated goods, reduced rated goods, and zero rated goods, i.e., some standard products like a computer mouse, a keyboard, like a foam roller, for example, or a
Mhm.
zero rated product might be food or baby products or something like that. If you don't separate those out when you account for your revenue, then you'll pay too much VAT because you'll probably account for them all as 20% VAT,
Mm.
and some of those were actually zero rated or reduced rated, so 0% or 5%. So that's the first thing. But the second thing, which is probably more prevalent, is that people don't separate out exports. They just assume that when they're selling on Amazon.co.uk, for example, or they're selling on one of the other sales channels that we support as well, like eBay, for example, that all their sales are going to UK customers. And what they don't realize is
Mm.
that the eBay global shipping program and the Amazon global shipping program is shipping their products all over the world. And when a customer from outside the UK buys their products, they don't pay VAT. And
Mhm.
so they have not collected any VAT from the customer, and so they shouldn't be paying any VAT to HMRC. And we see that time and time again that people don't separate that out. And they'll say like, "Oh, but I definitely don't have any sales outside the UK. I only sell on Amazon
Mm.
UK or I only sell on eBay UK." And they
Mhm.
just don't realize that it's happening. It's like unless you've opted out, Amazon and eBay are doing that. So
Mhm.
that's number
Mhm.
two. And then number three is there's actually some rules in the UK in VAT legislation, which means that in certain circumstances, the marketplaces themselves are responsible for collecting and remitting the VAT. And so, unless you are identifying those sales and separating those out, then what will happen is the customer will pay the VAT. The sales
Mhm.
channel will then recoup that from you, and they'll pass it directly to the HMRC. And then when you account for the sale, you'll also pass the VAT to the HMRC. So now you've paid VAT twice on that
Mhm. Yeah.
transaction. And so you lose out on your profitability, basically. So it's really important that you separate out the revenue into those categories. So you've got standard revenue, reduced revenue, and zero revenue on the product side. You've then got domestic sales and international sales. And then you've got sales where you are responsible for VAT and sales where the marketplace is responsible for VAT. And then to tie it back, like you said, over as to how
Yeah.
Link My Books can
Yeah.
help with that, that's exactly what we do. So when we look at your payouts from the sales channels, we look at the individual transactions that made up the payout, and we look up the VAT information on each of those individual orders. So we will separate out products based on the product type, we will separate out international and domestic orders, and we will separate out orders which are VAT responsible for you and VAT responsible for the marketplace. So that means that your income will be sorted. But that is a big mistake that sellers make. And then the second one we talked about was around the fee side of things. So if we take Amazon, because they are probably the most complicated, Amazon has entities all over the world. And so some of their fees they charge from their UK entity, and some of their fees they charge from their Luxembourg entity. And they try and charge as many as they can through Luxembourg because it's cheaper for them to basically do that. But back in August 2024, there was some new legislation passed which meant that they had to now charge most of their fees from the UK, which means that most of their fees are 20% now. So seller fees, regardless of where the item is going to, that is 20%. But your fulfillment fees are now all based on where the item is shipped to and from. And so some of those will be 20% and some of those will be reverse charged. So there's no VAT to pay. You just account for the VAT. And then your advertising fees, some of those for the UK advertising will be 20% and some of those will be reverse charged. And then the same for your storage fees. So it becomes really complicated to do this manually. So even if you're
Yeah.
passing this to your accountant and just trusting that they do it correctly, unless they know that, unless they are down with all of the latest e-commerce VAT rules, then the chances are they might be getting this incorrect. And if they over declare or under declare your VAT, then it'll create a whole bunch of problems down the line. Because if you overpay, you're taking money out of your pocket and you're basically just giving it to the HMRC. If you underpay and HMRC find out about it and they do an audit and they realize you've been getting it wrong, then you'll not only have to pay them the VAT you should have paid them, but you'll also pay a penalty. And they can be 30, 50, or 100% depending on how serious it is. So it's definitely not worth getting it wrong. And so the question then becomes, do you want to rely on you doing this manually or your accountant doing this manually, or do you want to get them or you to use the software that can just do this automatically and 100% accurately every single time? And that's why Link My Books is the number one thing that UK businesses should be thinking about when they're selling on e-commerce.